when a cocky black belt challenged the quiet cleaning lady at the dojo to just a friendly spar. Everyone expected an easy win for him, but what happened in the next few minutes left the entire room frozen in stunned silence, their jaws nearly touching the floor. It was a slow evening at the dojo, the kind where the sound of bare feet hitting the mat echoed softly, and the rhythmic grunts of students practicing their katas filled the room. Mariah, the quiet cleaning lady, moved silently along the edges of the practice floor with her mop and bucket, her eyes lowered as usual. She was in her late 40s, a slim woman with tired but kind eyes, and she rarely spoke unless spoken to. Most of the students barely noticed her presence anymore, except to nod politely as she passed. But that night, one person did notice her. Troy. He was the youngest black belt at the dojo, only 21, and known for being brash and full of himself. Tall, muscular, and quick. He was talented, but he had a way of showing off every chance he got. After finishing a particularly flashy spinning kick in front of his friends, Troy spotted Mariah wringing out her mop and smirked. "Hey, Miss Mariah," he called out, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "You ever think about stepping on the mat? Want to spar? Just for fun?" The room erupted in laughter. The idea of the quiet cleaning lady sparring with the star black belt seemed ridiculous to everyone. Mariah paused, her hands gripping the mop handle, and looked up at Troy. Her face showed no embarrassment, no irritation, just calm. "Sure," she said simply, leaning the mop against the wall. The laughter died instantly, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. "Wait, what?" Troy asked, his grin faltering. "I said sure," Mariah repeated, stepping toward the mat with a steady, unhurried stride. The students started whispering to each other, unsure if she was joking or serious, but Mariah's eyes told them she was not playing. Troy's friends snickered behind him, egging him on, and he puffed out his chest. "All right then, let's do it," he said, trying to mask his sudden unease with bravado. As Mariah entered the sparring area, Troy gestured dramatically, bowing in the traditional way but smirking the whole time. She returned the bow quietly, her movements precise and respectful, then stood straight, waiting. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you," Troy said, chuckling. And a few of the students laughed nervously, but something about Mariah's posture made a few others stop smiling. She wasn't stiff or hesitant like a beginner. She stood, balanced, relaxed, her feet placed with practiced ease. Troy didn't notice. He was too busy playing to the crowd. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," Mariah said softly. The room went silent, all eyes locked on the mismatched pair. Nobody knew what to expect, but they were sure Troy would handle it easily. After all, he was a black belt, and she was just the cleaning lady. Yet as she slowly raised her hands and settled into a stance that looked far too natural, a faint chill rippled through the audience. The students quickly formed a circle around the sparring mat, their excitement filling the air like static. Troy rolled his shoulders dramatically, bouncing lightly on his feet as though he were preparing for a big tournament, flashing a grin at his audience. Mariah, in her work clothes and worn sneakers, stood completely still. Her breathing was slow, her hands raised with quiet purpose, and for some reason the way she stood made a few of the students exchange uneasy glances. "All right, here we go," Troy said loudly, almost as if he was reassuring himself, and he lunged forward with a swift front kick aimed at her midsection. The room collectively held its breath, expecting the match to be over in seconds, but Mariah slipped to the side with uncanny speed, her movement so effortless it almost looked like a dance. Troy stumbled slightly, surprised he'd missed, and quickly tried to recover. He launched a second strike, this time a roundhouse kick meant to impress the crowd, but Mariah dropped low, her body flowing under his leg like water. Gasps echoed through the dojo as she came up behind him in one smooth motion, lightly tapping his back with her palm, an unmistakable sign she'd scored a clean hit. Troy's face flushed as he spun around. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. This time he came at her with a flurry of punches, aiming high and low, his black belt skills on full display. Yet Mariah's movements were impossibly sharp. Every block was precise, every dodge perfectly timed, and the soft shuffle of her sneakers on the mat was the only sound as she effortlessly read his attacks. Then, without warning, she stepped inside his guard and placed her hand gently against his chest, using his own momentum to send him stumbling backward. He barely kept his balance and looked at her with disbelief. She's good," someone whispered from the crowd, and the others nodded silently. Mariah's face remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was a glint in her eyes, as though she'd woken up a part of herself that had been asleep for years. Troy, now embarrassed, charged at her with full power, abandoning the idea of going easy. He threw a spinning kick with all the force he could muster, but Mariah pivoted, catching his ankle mid-spin with lightning-fast reflexes. With one controlled movement, she swept his other leg, sending him crashing onto the mat. The dojo erupted in shocked exclamations as Troy lay flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling in stunned silence. Mariah immediately stepped back, her posture respectful, and extended a hand to help him up. "You all right?" she asked softly, her voice calm as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Troy looked up at her, too stunned to speak, and for the first time since the spar began, his ego had completely vanished. Around them, the students were dead silent, the weight of what they had just witnessed sinking in. Troy slowly got back to his feet, his pride bruised more than his body, and the silence in the dojo was deafening. He dusted himself off, trying to regain his composure, but the red creeping up his neck betrayed his embarrassment. Mariah stood a few feet away, relaxed, waiting patiently without a hint of mockery in her expression. That only made Troy angrier. "All right, no more playing around," he muttered under his breath, squaring his stance with renewed determination. This time, there was no forced smile, no attempt to show off for the crowd. He lunged forward with a speed that surprised even the students watching, unleashing a powerful combination of punches and kicks. But Mariah met him with the same calm precision as before, deflecting each strike effortlessly, her feet gliding over the mat with practiced grace. She moved like she could see his attacks before he even made them, each dodge and block a perfect counter. When Troy tried to trap her in a corner, she stepped sideways at the last second, pivoting around him so smoothly it looked like choreography. The crowd gasped again as Troy swung hard and missed completely, nearly losing his balance. "Come on, man, hit her," one of his friends shouted, but it only made Troy feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. Desperate, he decided to go for a takedown, lunging low to grab her legs, but Mariah shifted her weight at the exact moment he reached her, spinning around behind him. In one swift motion, she hooked her arm around his shoulder and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the mat hard for the second time, the thud echoing through the room. Mariah released him immediately and stepped back, giving him space to rise, but Troy stayed down for a few seconds longer than necessary, staring at the floor with clenched fists. How are you doing this?" he finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. Mariah gave him a small, almost wistful smile. "I've had some training," she said softly, offering no further explanation. The students leaned in closer, hanging on every word, but she didn't elaborate. Troy pushed himself up again, though his confidence was visibly shattered. He tried one last desperate attack, sprinting forward with all his strength, but Mariah didn't even flinch. She stepped aside at the perfect moment, used the slightest push against his shoulder, and redirected his momentum so he stumbled forward and dropped to his knees. The dojo erupted into whispers and low exclamations. Troy sat there, breathing heavily, his defeat undeniable. Mariah walked over, extended her hand again, and this time he took it, too drained to resist. "You're amazing," he admitted reluctantly, still trying to process what had just happened. She only shook her head. "No," she said quietly, "I just don't underestimate anyone." With that, she stepped back and picked up her mop from the corner of the room, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, leaving the entire class stunned into silence. The dojo remained silent long after the spar had ended, the students exchanging glances as Mariah quietly picked up her mop and bucket like nothing had happened. The same woman they'd all walked past countless times without a second thought had just dismantled their top black belt without even breaking a sweat. Troy, still catching his breath, stared at her with wide eyes, his usual swagger completely gone. Finally, he stood up and stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "I'm sorry," he said, and the entire room seemed to pause at his words. "I shouldn't have. I thought you—" He stopped, unable to finish, but Mariah understood. She looked at him kindly and nodded. "It's all right," she said softly, "but never judge someone by how they look. You never know what they've been through, or what they're capable of." The weight of her words hung in the air, and the students who had once laughed at the idea of her sparring now stared at her with newfound respect. One of the younger boys, no older than 12, finally found the courage to ask, "Miss Mariah, how do you know all this? Were you, a fighter before?" Mariah hesitated for a moment, her eyes softening as memories seemed to flicker behind them. "A long time ago," she admitted. "I used to compete in tournaments. I even won a few, but life changes, and I stepped away from that world." She gave a small shrug, as though it was no big deal, but to the students it felt like they were looking at a living legend. A few of them whispered in awe, unable to believe the quiet woman mopping their floors had once been a fighter strong enough to humble a black belt with ease. Troy, still humbled, stepped forward again and bowed deeply, the traditional show of respect in martial arts. "Thank you for the lesson," he said sincerely. Mariah returned the bow with the same calm grace she'd shown all evening. "You're welcome," she said, her voice as steady as ever. "But remember, strength isn't just about winning fights. It's about respect, discipline, and knowing when not to fight at all." With that, she picked up her bucket and walked out of the sparring area, heading back to her work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet, for everyone in the dojo, everything had changed. The students watched her mop the floor in silence, each of them reflecting on what they had seen, the lesson quietly sinking into their hearts. The story of that night would spread far beyond the walls of the dojo about the cleaning lady who shocked a room full of martial artists and taught them a lesson in humility without raising her voice once. And though Mariah never asked for attention or recognition, her name became one spoken with respect and admiration, because from that day forward, no one ever looked at her the same way again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle on YouTube for more powerful and inspiring stories every week.